The Radio Wammo Breakfast.
Jeff Dudas from underwatertimes.com.
He joins us from Miami today. Hello to you, Jeff.
How you doing, Wammo?
I am not too bad. Before we kick off, I thought I'd ask you about the situation with the oil leak over in that part of the world. How close is that to where you are?
They say it may actually end up in Miami. It's a few hundred miles away out in the Gulf, more towards the Central Gulf. But there's a current that goes along the coast and wraps around Florida and goes up the U.S. east coast. There's the loop current, they call it.
Yeah.
And they're afraid that the oil may get wrapped up in that and just sort of go on a conveyor belt all the way around the U.S. East Coast.
Wow, is this something that everyone there is talking about? Is it on everyone's lips? Are they worried about this?
It's on the top story of all the news. I've been working in Louisiana, and it's the top story there, and all along the Gulf Coast and in Florida. It's all over the news here. It's a big story.
And obviously, for someone like you who deals with the ocean every day, I suppose this will affect your work.
It produces a lot of news, so there's a lot of things to follow, and there's a lot of marine life out in the Gulf of Mexico. It's full of all sort of it's a huge fishing industry out there, and then all this wildlife and scuba diving out there, and then the Florida Everglades. It's a huge wildlife preserve, so it's scary stuff.
And are any wildlife drastically affected at the moment?
It's right now, no. They're sort of waiting. The oil is still sort of out in the middle of the Gulf. It hasn't moved much. It's still coming up, and it really hasn't hit shore in any large scale yet. And so that's what the fears are right now. The winds are sort of keeping it out in the Gulf, but that could change any given day. So
there's potential that eventually you could go to your nearest beach and it could be a reality.
Absolutely. Anywhere along the U.S. Gulf Coast and perhaps even the East Coast.
Well, that would be absolutely tragic.
It would be. It'd be horrible. I mean, we're going. I mean, among other things, we're going into the big holiday season here.
Yeah.
And everybody's worried about that. And anybody, that's anywhere near the beach, they're all out looking and waiting for the oil.
Well, Jeff, on to our first story today, a story about the world's largest invertebrate. Some news on this. Yes,
and this is the colossal squid, and this is the creature of legend, literally. This goes back to the Kraken sea monster legends of yore, where you would see these pictures of a squid sort of attacking an old sailboat, and they're fighting them off. Well, that was the colossal squid. And, even to this day, I mean, this is going back hundreds of years, almost nothing is known about this squid. They've seen it a couple times live. They've pulled up dead specimens. They're gruesome-looking creatures. They have these long tentacles with these sort of grappling hooks on them that they sort of maul and shred their prey with. But almost nothing is known sort of about their behavior. It's never been studied. So now scientists are looking at it another way. They're trying to figure out, maybe they can figure out, what it eats, and from looking at its metabolism to figure out, what kind of predator it is. And so they've done that. And so they looked at the isotopes of what was in some of these recovered specimens, and they figured out that they eat Antarctic toothfish, which is, I think, actually served around the world. So it's a fairly common fish.
It's fish down in the Ross Sea.
Yes, and so it's a deep sea, cold water fish, and they also figured out from its metabolism. Basically, they scaled it up from other creatures that live in the deep sea, and they figured out this giant squid, this 500 kilogram squid, can survive on a 5 kilogram toothfish for 200 days.
200 days.
So basically, what they were thinking about, this squid that could maybe attack sperm whales and do all this other stuff and be a voracious predator, basically eats one fish, lasts us almost 2/3 of a year.
It's the equivalent of a crumb to us.
It's nothing. And so extrapolating again, they think it just basically sits and waits and maybe ambushes prey that comes along. So it's not really going out and seeking out food. It just sort of floats along and waits for something to come its way. It finds it and it eats it, and evidently only does it every 6-8 months.
Well, so when fishermen complain about fish stocks getting low, particularly with the toothfish, they can't blame it on the colossal squid.
This guy's not doing it.
No.
They say even its big eyes, and this is another thing. It has, I think they brought up a specimen and it had eyes like the size of a dinner plate.
Yeah.
And they were saying, well, it's using this to search for prey and such. And it's like, no, basically, it's using those big eyes to avoid everything else.
I think you can go and see one on display in Te Papa in Wellington, a museum in Wellington, New Zealand.
Yeah, I think they plasticized one. They turned it into plastic or something. They did something strange. I remember a story about that.
No, the stuff of nightmares is what they are.
But evidently so. But
yeah.
Just don't worry about being eaten by one, because looks like that won't happen.
No. Now, from one large animal of the sea to another, whales, maybe not as smart as we were thinking a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, especially right whales. Evidently, they get it wrong sometimes when it comes to identifying their own babies or their own calves. The British researchers they're out in the North Atlantic studying right whales and trying to figure out the family tree. And they scratching their head. They came across some abnormalities. There were a couple whales, in fact, 2 whales they found that were with the wrong mother, and they didn't know why. And they're never been recorded that perhaps a whale would adopt another whale, and especially living close together. So they figured what might have happened, an accident out at sea, that these whales gave birth, and they're essentially gave birth at the same time and probably right next to each other, and somehow the calves got switched at birth, and they latched on to the wrong mother.
Huh.
So this is, again, something never been documented before. Now they're wondering, well, maybe this happens more than we know.
Well, they all look the same, don't they? Really?
Say again?
They all look the same.
Well, maybe to the mother, I don't know, but. So now they're going to go back out and study again to see if they can figure out this happens more than what we think.
Well, it's been a morning so far of monsters of the sea, and finally we have another one, a crab, a huge monster.
A titan crab, they're calling it. A monster from the sea has been pulled up from the shores off of Great Britain. They're calling it one of the largest ever edible crabs pulled from the sea, at least in Great Britain, with the claws the size of a human fist. And they're calling it Titan, this crab. It has a 60-centimeter claw span, so when it spreads out its claws 60 centimeters. Its body, its shell, 26 centimeters across, or about 10 inches across, and tips the scales at 8 pounds. So
wow.
This is never. They went back and looked at the record books. Nothing like this has ever been pulled from the sea. So instead of eating it, they're dropping it off in an aquarium. They're going to let this aquarium keep it. But they're trying to figure out more about it. No idea how old this giant crab is. I think it might be at least 20 years old, maybe older.
Yeah.
And they say it's quite feisty, with these large claws that are, sort of handling it with kid gloves.
I mean, no doubt that the sea would have been crazy with all these years ago before they were fished.
Exactly, and that's why it's somewhat surprising. You hear this every once in a while. There's a record fish or a record crab. They're still out there. So
yeah,
there seems to be no shortage of record fish, at least from off the coast of Great Britain.
That's certainly a few crab salads in that one crab.
There you go.
Jeff Dudas, editor of underwatertimes.com. People can find those stories there and a whole lot more as well. We'll talk to you in 2 weeks.
Thanks for having me.
Track now from Thieves is called